He walked in and found her tearing apart his son's pillow. For a moment, James Walker couldn't breathe. The maid, this woman he barely knew, was ripping open the fabric with shaking hands, white powder spilling onto the floor like snow. "What are you doing?" His voice cracked. "What the hell are you doing?" Teresa looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, holding something in her trembling fingers. And what she said next would change everything. 3 years. That's how long James Walker had been watching his son die. 3 years of doctors walking through his house like pallbearers, specialists from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, men and women with decades of experience, shaking their heads with expensive sympathy. 3 years of experimental treatments that cost more than most people make in a lifetime. 3 years of watching his 8-year-old boy fade a little more each day, and not one of them could tell him why. Oliver had been sick since he was 5. It started small fatigue, stomach pain, episodes they called flare-ups. Then it got worse, the tremors, the vomiting, the seizures that made James hold his son's small body and beg God not to take him too. Because James had already lost Oliver's mother. She died giving birth to him. And every time James looked at his son, he saw her eyes staring back. He couldn't lose them both, so he tried everything. He hired the best. He spent millions. He prayed prayers that felt like they hit the ceiling and fell back down. Nothing worked. And then Teresa Gray walked into his house. She wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a housekeeper from New Haven, a black woman in her late 20s who cleaned floors to pay rent after life knocked her sideways. She'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through community college before her family fell apart. Before she lost her younger sister to a mistake, the doctors made a misdiagnosis they missed because no one listened to the person who knew her best. Teresa's sister died in a hospital bed 5 years ago, and Teresa stood there watching, knowing something was wrong but too scared to speak up, too afraid to question the people with the white coats and the credentials. She made herself a promise that day, a promise that burned in her chest like a brand. Never again. If she ever saw something wrong, if her gut ever screamed at her the way it did the night her sister died, she would speak, no matter what it cost her. When Teresa started working at the Walker estate, her job was simple. Dust, organize, stay invisible. But the previous housekeeper quit without warning, and staff shortages meant Teresa got reassigned to Oliver's wing. That's when she started noticing. Small things at first, the kind of things you miss if you're not paying attention. Oliver got violently sick after his smoothies, every single time. But on the rare days he refused them, the days he fell asleep before finishing or pushed them away, he was different, brighter, stronger. He sat up, he smiled, he asked questions. No one else saw it. Not the doctors, not his father, not the woman making those smoothies. Dr. Helena Morse, the live-in nutritionist James had hired 3 years ago when Oliver first got sick. Teresa kept watching, kept tracking. And then one morning, she found Dr. Morse's personal blender in the sink, the one she always washed herself, always put away immediately. But that day, it was just sitting there, wet, with residue still clinging to the sides. Teresa's hands shook as she leaned closer. The smell hit her bitter, metallic, wrong. This wasn't a health drink. This was something else. She grabbed her phone, took a picture, used a cotton swab to collect a sample into a plastic bag she stuffed in her pocket. 3 days later, her cousin Marcus, a pharmacology student at Yale, called her back. His voice was shaking. "Teresa, what you sent me, that's not a supplement. There's oleander extract in there, plant-based poison. Small doses over time would look exactly like a chronic illness. Someone is killing that kid." Teresa's blood went cold. She went back to Oliver's room, the room where she'd watched him suffer, where she'd counted 47 medication bottles on his nightstand, where he'd asked her once, with eyes too tired for 8 years old, "Do you think dying hurts?" She looked at his bed, at the pillows Dr. Morse said were medically specialized, the ones Oliver had to use every night, and she tore them open. Inside the lining were small sachets, sewn in, hidden, filled with white powder. Powder Oliver had been breathing in every single night for 3 years while he slept. That's when James walked in. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come wrapped in a degree. Sometimes it comes from the person no one's watching, the one who refuses to look away, the one who's learned what silence costs. And sometimes, just sometimes, God puts the right person in the right place at the exact moment a life depends on it. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because what happens next will remind you that courage doesn't always come from the people we expect. The iron gates opened slowly, like they were tired of letting people in. Teresa stood there for a moment, gripping the worn strap of her canvas bag, staring up at the house that looked more like a museum than a home. Glass and stone stretched across perfectly cut lawns. Everything was sharp, clean, cold. She'd taken 2 buses to get here, left her apartment in New Haven at 5:30 inches the morning. Her coat pulled tight against the October chill. She couldn't afford to be late. Not on her first day. Not when she needed this job so badly her stomach had been in knots all week. The agency had called her 3 days ago. Emergency placement, they said. Previous housekeeper, quit without notice. Family needs someone immediately. Light housekeeping, private wing. Pay is good. Teresa didn't ask why the last girl left. She needed the paycheck. But standing there now, looking at the Walker estate, something in her chest tightened. The house was beautiful, no question, but it felt wrong somehow. Too quiet, like it was holding its breath. She walked up the stone path, her sneakers barely making a sound. The front door opened before she could knock. A woman stood there, 50-something. Grey hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her eyes swept over Teresa like she was being appraised, measured, and found lacking in the same glance. "You're late," the woman said. Teresa glanced at her watch. She was 4 minutes early. "I'm Mrs. Calloway, estate manager. You'll report to me." The woman stepped aside, barely. "Come in." The entryway was massive, marble floors, a staircase that curved up like something out of a movie, everything spotless, everything silent. Mrs. Calloway handed her a thick folder without ceremony. "Your duties are outlined here. Light housekeeping in the main wing and the private 3rd floor. You'll avoid the master bedroom, Mr. Walker's office, and the medical suite, unless specifically instructed." Teresa took the folder. It was heavier than it looked. "The 3rd floor," Mrs. Calloway continued, her voice flat, "is where the child stays. Oliver. He's 8. He's been ill for some time. You are not to move any of his medications. You are not to touch any medical equipment. You are not to engage him in conversations that might upset or excite him. And you are absolutely not to question Dr. Morse. Dr. Morse, the family's nutritionist. She oversees Oliver's care. She's been with the family since his diagnosis. She knows what she's doing." Teresa nodded slowly, but her mind caught on something. A nutritionist overseeing a sick child? Where were the doctors? "Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed, like she could read the question forming. "Mr. Walker has consulted with every specialist on the East Coast. Oliver's condition is complicated. Dr. Morse has been the only constant, the only one who stayed." There was something in the way she said it, like staying was a virtue, like everyone else had failed by leaving. "The previous housekeeper," Teresa asked carefully. "Why did she leave?" Mrs. Calloway's jaw tightened. She asked too many questions, overstepped. This family has been through enough without staff causing disruptions. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You seem like a smart woman, so let me be clear. You're here to clean, that's all. The Walkers don't need your opinions. They don't need your concern. They need you to do your job and stay out of the way." Teresa felt her face flush, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard words like this before. All her life, really. Know your place. Don't ask. Don't question. But 5 years ago, those words had cost her everything. Her sister Janelle had been 19, bright, full of life. Then she got sick, stomach pain, fatigue, fevers that wouldn't break. The doctors said it was stress, anxiety. They prescribed antidepressants and sent her home. But Teresa knew her sister, knew something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. She just didn't speak up. 3 weeks later, Janelle collapsed. By the time they got her back to the hospital, the infection had spread too far. Sepsis, organ failure. She died 2 days later, holding Teresa's hand, whispering, "It's okay, it's not your fault." But it was. Teresa had known, and she'd stayed silent, because who was she to question the doctors? Who was she to push back against people with degrees and authority? She'd made herself a promise at Janelle's funeral, standing in the rain, watching them lower her baby sister into the ground. Never again. If she ever felt that pull in her gut again, that knowing, she would speak, she would fight. even if it cost her everything. Mrs. Calloway was already walking toward the stairs. "Follow me. I'll show you the third floor." They climbed in silence. The house felt bigger the higher they went. Colder, too, like warmth couldn't reach this far up. When they reached the third floor, Teresa noticed the change immediately. The walls here were different, lighter, softer, meant for a child, but the air felt heavy, stale. Mrs. Calloway stopped outside a door covered in faded superhero stickers. Spider-Man, Batman, the Hulk. They looked old, peeling at the edges. "This is Oliver's room. He's likely asleep. Don't wake him. Just familiarize yourself with the space. Dusting, organizing, nothing more." Teresa nodded. Mrs. Calloway handed her the keys, then paused. Her expression softened for just a second, something almost like sadness flickering across her face. "He's a sweet boy. He's been through more than any child should. Just remember that." And then she was gone. Footsteps echoing down the hall. Teresa stood there, staring at those superhero stickers. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. She didn't know why her heart was pounding, didn't know why every instinct in her body was screaming at her to pay attention, but she'd learned to trust that voice, the one that had been silent when Janelle needed her. She opened the door. The smell hit her first, antiseptic, sharp and clean, but underneath it something floral. Lavender, maybe. Like someone was trying to cover up the scent of sickness. The room was enormous, too big for one small boy. Medical equipment lined the walls, monitors, an IV stand, machines she didn't recognize. The bed sat in the center, massive and white, surrounded by what looked like a dozen pillows. And there, almost swallowed by the blankets, was Oliver. He was so small, pale skin, thin arms. His brown hair stuck to his forehead, damp with sweat even though the room was cool. But his eyes were open, watching her. "Are you going to leave too?" he whispered. Teresa's breath caught. His voice was so soft, so tired. She set down her cleaning supplies carefully and moved closer. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Teresa. I'm here to help keep your room nice." "The last lady left," Oliver said. He wasn't accusing, just stating a fact. "Everyone leaves." Teresa knelt beside the bed so they were eye level. Up close, she could see how exhausted he looked, dark circles under his eyes, lips chapped. But those eyes, hazel, like autumn leaves, were watching her with something that broke her heart. Hope, just a flicker of it, like he wanted to believe her but didn't dare. "I'm not going anywhere," Teresa said gently. "Not unless you want me to." Oliver studied her for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to the table beside his bed. Teresa followed his eyes and felt her stomach drop. Bottles. So many bottles. Orange prescription containers lined up in neat rows. She started counting without meaning to. 47. 47 medications for one 8-year-old boy. Her nursing instincts kicked in, the ones she'd developed during those 2 years at community college before money ran out and she had to drop out. Before cleaning houses became the only option. She recognized some of the labels. Antibiotics, immunosuppressants, heart medication, anti-nausea pills, steroids. But something was off. Some of these drugs counteracted each other. Others seemed redundant. It looked less like treatment and more like she didn't know what. "Do you take all of these?" she asked softly. Oliver nodded. 4 times a day, and the smoothies 3 times. Dr. Morse makes them special for me." "Dr. Morse?" "She takes care of me. She's really smart. She went to fancy schools." He said it like he'd heard it repeated many times. "Dad says she's the only one who can help me." "And the smoothies help?" Oliver's face changed, just slightly, a shadow passing through those tired eyes. "They're supposed to," he whispered, "but they make my stomach hurt, and after I drink them, everything gets bad. But Dr. Morse says medicine has to hurt before it helps." Something cold slid down Teresa's spine. "When was the last time you went outside?" she asked, keeping her voice light. Oliver frowned, like he was trying to remember something from a dream. "I'm not allowed. Dr. Morse says the air outside could make me sicker, and I might fall, or get germs, so I have to stay in bed." A child afraid of fresh air, a child who'd forgotten what it felt like to run. This wasn't medicine. This was a prison. Teresa swallowed hard. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "how about we make this room feel a little less like a hospital? Would that be okay?" Oliver's eyes widened slightly. You won't get in trouble? Let me worry about that. She stood and walked to the window. Heavy curtains blocked out the light. She pulled them open gently, and October sunshine spilled across the floor in golden streams. Oliver gasped softly, like he'd forgotten what sunlight looked like. There, Teresa said. That's better, isn't it? He nodded, staring at the light like it was magic. She picked up a picture book from the shelf, something about a dragon who'd lost his fire and had to learn to fly again. She sat on the edge of his bed, careful not to jostle him. Want me to read to you? Oliver nodded again, pulling his threadbare teddy bear Mr. Buttons closer to his chest. Teresa opened the book and began to read. Her voice filled the silence, soft and steady, and slowly, so slowly, Oliver's shoulders relaxed, his breathing evened out, and then she heard it. A small sound, quiet and uncertain. Laughter. It was fragile, like something that had been buried for so long it wasn't sure it was allowed out, but it was real. And somewhere deep in that massive, silent house, in a place no one was paying attention, something began to shift. Because Teresa Gray had learned the hard way that silence kills, and she wasn't going to be silent. Not this time. Not when a little boy's life was on the line. Over the next 2 weeks, Teresa fell into a rhythm. She'd arrive at the estate every morning just after 7, when the house was still quiet and the sun was just starting to burn through the fog, rolling off Long Island Sound. She'd make her way up to the 3rd floor, her footsteps soft on the carpet, and she'd find Oliver exactly where she'd left him the day before. In that bed, surrounded by those pillows, waiting. But something had changed since that first day. Something small but important. Now, when she opened the door, Oliver would smile. It wasn't much, just a little lift at the corners of his mouth. But for a kid who'd been told he was dying for 3 years, a smile was everything. They'd talk while she worked. Small conversations, safe ones. Oliver told her about his mum, the one he'd never met. How his dad kept a photo of her on his desk but never talked about her. How sometimes Oliver would find his father standing in front of it late at night, just staring. I think he's mad at me, Oliver said one morning. His voice so quiet, Teresa almost missed it. She was dusting the bookshelf. She stopped. Why would you think that, baby? Because she died so I could be born. And now I'm dying anyway. So it was all for nothing. Teresa's chest tightened. She set down the duster and came to sit beside him. Oliver, look at me. He did. Those hazel eyes full of guilt no child should carry. Your mama gave you life because she loved you, not because she had to. And your daddy? He's not mad at you. He's scared. There's a difference. How do you know? Because I lost someone I loved too, my little sister, and I spent years being angry at myself for not saving her. But anger and love, they get mixed up sometimes, especially when you're hurting. Oliver was quiet for a moment, processing. Do you still miss her? Every single day. Does it get easier? Teresa thought about lying, about saying something comforting, but Oliver deserved the truth. No, she said softly, but you learn to carry it differently. He nodded like he understood, like he'd already been carrying weight he was too young to hold. Miss Teresa? Yeah, sweetheart. Do you think I'm gonna die? The question hit her like a punch. She wanted to say no, wanted to promise him 50 more years, but she'd learned not to make promises she couldn't keep. I think, she said carefully, that you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, and I think you're gonna surprise a lot of people. Oliver smiled again, a little bigger this time, and that's when Teresa started noticing the pattern. It was subtle at first, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, but Teresa was always paying attention now. Every day around 10 in the morning, Dr. Morse would come in with Oliver's first smoothie. She was tall, polished, always dressed like she'd just stepped out of a board meeting, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her smile, professional but cold. Good morning, Oliver, she'd say in that practiced voice. Time for your vitamins. The smoothies were thick, purple or green depending on the day. Oliver would drink them slowly, grimacing with each sip, and within 2 hours, he'd get sick. The first time Teresa saw it, she thought it was coincidence. Oliver doubled over, clutching his stomach, his face going pale. Then came the vomiting, the tremors in his hands, the way his whole body would shake. Dr. Morse would rush in, all concern and efficiency. It's the disease progressing, she'd say, checking his vitals, adjusting his medications. His system is fighting itself. But the second time it happened, Same pattern, same timeline. Teresa started taking notes in her head. Smoothie at 10, sickness by noon. The third time, she was certain. And then one morning, something different happened. Oliver had fallen asleep before Dr. Morse arrived with his smoothie. Teresa watched from across the room as the doctor stood there, smoothie in hand, staring at the sleeping boy with an expression that made Teresa's skin crawl. Not concern, not compassion, frustration. Dr. Morse set the smoothie down and left without waking him. That day, Oliver slept until 2 in the afternoon. When he woke up, his color was better, his eyes brighter. He sat up without help. "I feel good today," he said, surprised. Teresa's heart started pounding. "Yeah, that's wonderful, baby. Can we play a game?" It was the first time he'd asked to play anything. They spent the afternoon building a tower out of blocks. Teresa found buried in his closet. Oliver's hands were steady. His laughter came easier. He looked like a regular kid. By the time Dr. Morse came back for the evening smoothie, Oliver was tired but happy. The doctor's eyes swept the room, landing on the blocks scattered across the floor. Her jaw tightened. "Oliver shouldn't be exerting himself," she said sharply, looking at Teresa. "Who authorized this?" "We were just playing," Teresa said evenly. "He needs rest. Complete rest. You're jeopardizing his recovery." Recovery. The word felt like a lie. Dr. Morse prepared the evening smoothie right there, her movements precise and controlled. She watched Oliver drink every drop, her eyes never leaving him. Teresa stood in the corner, her mind racing. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Oliver's face bright and alive when he skipped the smoothie, pale and sick after he drank it. She kept hearing her sister's voice. That night in the hospital. "Something's wrong, Reese. Tell them something's wrong." And Teresa had been too scared to push, too afraid to question the doctors who knew better. Her sister died 3 days later. At 2 in the morning, Teresa got out of bed in her small room on the first floor. She walked through the dark house, up the stairs, and stood outside Oliver's door. She could hear him inside, restless, hurting. She made herself a promise right there in that hallway. If her gut was right, if something was wrong, she wouldn't stay quiet this time, even if it cost her this job, even if it cost her everything. Because some things are worth more than a paycheck. Some things are worth fighting for. And that little boy with the tired eyes and the superhero stickers, he was worth everything. 3 weeks in, Teresa found the notebook. She was organizing Oliver's bookshelf picture books mostly, some chapter books that looked like they'd never been opened. Dust had settled on everything like the room itself had given up. That's when she saw it, wedged behind a copy of Where the Wild Things Are, a small spiral notebook with a superhero on the cover. Captain America's shield, faded from being touched too many times. She pulled it out carefully. The pages were wrinkled. Some had water stains or maybe tear stains. She opened it, and her breath caught. Oliver's handwriting, shaky, childish. The letters slanting in different directions like his hand had been trembling. Day 247. The purple drink made me throw up again. "Doctor," Morse said, "that means it's working. But it doesn't feel like working." Day 251. Dad came in today. He looked so tired. I pretended to be asleep because I don't want him to be more sad. Day 298. I heard Dr. Morse tell Dad I need more minerals. She says my body is fighting the medicine. But I don't feel like I'm fighting. I just feel tired all the time. Day 301. I don't want the smoothies anymore, but Dad says I have to. Dr. Morse says I'll get worse if I stop. Day 317. I asked God why he made me sick. Miss Calloway says God has a plan, but I don't understand the plan. Maybe the plan is for me to die like Mama. Teresa's hands shook so hard she almost dropped the notebook. The entries stopped there. 3 months ago, right around the time Oliver became too weak to hold a pen. She sat on the floor, the notebook pressed against her chest, tears streaming down her face. This child had been documenting his own poisoning, writing it down like he was taking notes, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. And no one had listened. She heard footsteps in the hall and quickly shoved the notebook into her apron pocket. "Doctor?" Morse appeared in the doorway, smoothie in hand, that professional smile fixed in place. "Teresa, I didn't realize you'd be here this early. Just getting a head start on the dusting." Dr. Morse's eyes swept the room, pausing on the bookshelf. For a split second, something flickered across her face. Suspicion, maybe, but it was gone before Teresa could be sure. "Oliver needs his rest," Dr. Morse said coolly. "Perhaps you could come back later." Teresa looked at Oliver, still asleep in his bed, his breathing shallow. Of course. She gathered her supplies and left, but not before catching the way Dr. Morse locked the door behind her. Locked it, like she was keeping something in, or someone out. That afternoon, Teresa made a decision that could cost her everything. She waited until Dr. Morse left for her daily walk 1 hour, every day at 3 o'clock, like clockwork. Then she went to the medical suite. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was pristine, organized. A small refrigerator hummed in the corner. Cabinets lined the walls. And there, in the sink, was Dr. Morse's personal blender cup. She never left it out. Never. She always hand-washed it immediately and put it away. But today, it was just sitting there, still wet. Teresa moved on instinct. She leaned over the sink and breathed in. The smell hit her like a fist. Bitter, chemical, wrong. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone and took a photo. Then she grabbed a cotton swab from the cabinet and collected a sample of the residue. Sealing it in a small plastic bag she tucked into her pocket next to Oliver's notebook. She cleaned the cup, dried it, put it back exactly where Dr. Morse kept it, and then she left, her entire body vibrating with fear and certainty. That night, she called her cousin Marcus. He was in his second year of pharmacology at Yale. She hadn't talked to him in months. "Marcus, I need a favor, and I need you not to ask too many questions yet." "Reese? What's going on? I need you to test something for me. Tell me what's in it." There was a pause. "Is this legal? A child's life might depend on it." She could hear him breathing on the other end. Then, "Okay, bring it by tomorrow." The next morning, Teresa took a personal day. She told Mrs. Calloway she had a family emergency. It wasn't technically a lie. She met Marcus at a coffee shop near campus. He looked older than she remembered, more serious. When she handed him the sealed bag, he held it up to the light. "Where'd you get this?" "I can't tell you yet. Please, Marcus, just tell me what's in it." He studied her face for a long moment. "This is about your job, isn't it? That estate you're working at." She didn't answer. Didn't have to. "Give me 3 days," he said quietly. Those 3 days were the longest of Teresa's life. She went back to work, cleaned Oliver's room, read to him, watched him drink those smoothies and get sick like clockwork. She watched Dr. Morse move through the house like she owned it, watched the way she spoke to James Walker, soft, proprietary, like she was the only thing standing between him and total collapse. And she watched James himself, exhausted, hollowed out, a man who'd spent 3 years watching his son die and still didn't know why. On the 3rd day, Marcus called. Teresa was in her small room on the 1st floor. It was just after midnight. She answered on the first ring. "Marcus," his voice was shaking. "Teresa, what you gave me. Where did you get it? Just tell me what it is." "It's oleander extract, plant-based cardiac glycoside. It's poison, Reese. Small doses over time it would look exactly like a progressive illness. Fatigue, nausea, heart problems, seizures, all of it." The room spun. Teresa sat down hard on the bed. "Are you sure?" "I ran it twice. There's no question. Someone is poisoning that kid. Slowly, deliberately." Teresa couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "Reese, you need to call the police. Right now." "I need proof," she whispered. "More proof. Something that can't be denied." "What are you talking about? This is proof." "Not enough. Not against someone like her." She hung up before he could argue. For a long time, she just sat there in the dark, Oliver's notebook on the bed beside her, the truth burning in her chest like fire. Dr. Helena Morse had been killing Oliver Walker for 3 years, slowly, carefully, making it look like a disease no one could cure. And Teresa was the only one who knew. She thought about her sister, about the promise she'd made. She thought about Oliver's tired eyes, his question that still haunted her. "Do you think I'm gonna die?" And she made her choice. She was going to stop this, whatever it took. Even if it meant walking into James Walker's office in the middle of the night and telling a desperate father that the woman he trusted was murdering his son. Even if he didn't believe her, even if it destroyed her. Because some truths are too important to stay buried. And some children are worth burning your whole life down to save. Teresa didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at Oliver's notebook, Marcus's words echoing in her head. Poison, oleander, small doses, over time. Every instinct in her body screamed to act, to run upstairs and grab Oliver, to call the police, to do anything right now. But she'd learned the hard way that instinct without strategy was just noise. She needed more. Something undeniable. Something that would make James Walker listen before Dr. Morse could twist the narrative and make Teresa disappear like the housekeeper before her. The next morning, she went to work like nothing had changed. She smiled at Mrs. Calloway, nodded at the groundskeeper, climbed the stairs to Oliver's room with her supplies, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Oliver was awake. Sitting up slightly, Mr. Buttons tucked under his arm. "Miss Teresa," he said, and his voice sounded weaker than yesterday. "I had bad dreams last night." She set down her things and came to sit beside him. "What kind of dreams, baby?" "I dreamed I was running, like really running, through a field or something, and I could breathe." He looked at her with those tired hazel eyes. "Do you think I'll ever run again?" Teresa's throat tightened. She wanted to promise him, wanted to say, "Yes, you will. I'm going to make sure of it." But the words stuck, because what if she was wrong? What if she confronted James, and he didn't believe her? What if Dr. Morse convinced him Teresa was crazy, dangerous, a threat to his son's care? What if speaking up made things worse? The doubt crept in like poison itself, cold, paralyzing. "Miss Teresa," Oliver's small hand touched hers. "You okay?" She blinked back tears and forced a smile. "Yeah, sweetheart, I'm okay." But she wasn't. She was terrified. That afternoon, she watched Dr. Morse prepare Oliver's smoothie in the medical suite, watched the way her hands moved, precise, practiced, like she'd done this 1,000 times, which she had. For 3 years, Dr. Morse caught her looking. "Can I help you with something, Teresa?" "No, ma'am. Just passing through." Dr. Morse's eyes were ice. "You've been spending quite a bit of time with Oliver, just keeping his room clean, like I'm supposed to." "Of course." Dr. Morse smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just remember he's fragile, emotionally and physically. Sometimes kindness can be damaging. It gives false hope." The words hit like a slap. False hope. "I'm just reading to him," Teresa said quietly. "I know." Dr. Morse stepped closer, lowering her voice. "And I appreciate your intentions, but you're not a medical professional. You don't understand the complexities of his condition. The last thing this family needs is someone disrupting carefully calibrated treatments." It was a warning, clear as day. "Stay in your lane, or else." Teresa nodded, kept her face neutral, and left. But inside, she was shaking. That evening, she tried to talk to James. She found him in his study, door half open, sitting behind a massive desk covered in papers. His hair was graying at the temples. His tie was loose. He looked like a man who hadn't had a full night's sleep in years. "Mr. Walker?" She knocked softly. "Sorry to bother you." He looked up, and for a second, he didn't seem to recognize her. Then his face shifted into polite exhaustion. "Teresa, is everything all right? I was just wondering, has Oliver always been on so many medications?" James's expression clouded. "Why are you asking? I noticed he has good days, days when he seems stronger, and I wondered if maybe—" "Dr. Morse handles Oliver's treatment plan," James interrupted, his voice sharper now. "She's been doing this for 3 years. She has degrees I can't even pronounce. She's the only reason Oliver is still—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Still here." Teresa felt the door closing, felt herself losing him. "I understand. I just thought maybe—" "I appreciate your concern." James stood, signaling the conversation was over. "But unless you have a medical degree I don't know about, I need you to trust the people who do." The dismissal was gentle, but absolute. Teresa left his office, her chest tight with frustration and fear. She'd tried, and she'd failed. Because how do you make someone listen when they're too afraid to hear? When they've built their entire hope on the person who's actually killing their child? That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Janelle's face floating in the darkness. "You knew something was wrong," her sister's voice whispered. "Why didn't you say something?" "I did," Teresa whispered back. "He didn't listen." "Then say it louder." But what if loud wasn't enough? What if she screamed the truth and still no one believed her? She thought about Oliver, about his question, "Do you think I'm gonna die?" She thought about his notebook, his small, shaky handwriting documenting his own slow death. She thought about the promise she'd made, the one that was supposed to matter more than anything. And she realized something that made her stomach turn. She was doing it again. She was choosing silence over risk, choosing her safety over a child's life. Because speaking up might cost her this job, might get her fired, might make people think she was crazy. Just like it had with Janelle, the realization hit her like cold water. She'd been so afraid of losing everything that she'd forgotten what mattered. Not her job, not her reputation, not even her own safety. Oliver, that little boy who still believed in superheroes, who asked if dying hurt, who dreamed about running through fields, he mattered more than her fear. Teresa sat up in bed, her decision made. Tomorrow, she was going back into that medical suite, and she was going to find the proof she needed, the kind James Walker couldn't ignore, even if it meant breaking every rule, even if it meant risking everything, because her sister had died in silence, and she'd be damned if she let Oliver Walker die the same way. Some promises are made in graveyards, and those are the ones you don't break, no matter what it costs. The next morning, Teresa waited. She watched Dr. Morse leave for her daily walk at 3 o'clock sharp, watched her disappear down the tree-lined path toward the gardens, phone pressed to her ear, already absorbed in whatever conversation kept her occupied for exactly 1 hour. Teresa's hands were sweating. Her heart felt like it was trying to break through her ribs. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Past Oliver's room, he was sleeping, finally peaceful after a rough morning. Then she moved down the hall to the medical suite. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was exactly as it always was, sterile, organized, a place for everything and everything in its place. Except today, Teresa wasn't just cleaning. She went to the locked cabinet first, the one Dr. Morse kept her specialized supplements in, the one she guarded like it held state secrets. Teresa pulled a bobby pin from her hair, something she'd learned from her brother years ago when they'd locked themselves out of their apartment. Her hands shook as she worked the lock. It clicked open. Inside were rows of unmarked containers, powders, dried plant material, small vials of liquid, and a notebook. Teresa pulled it out, her breath catching. It was a journal. Dr. Morse's handwriting neat, clinical, precise. October 12. Increased oleander extract to 0.3 milligrams. Patient showing appropriate symptoms. Vomiting episode lasted 4 hours. Father remains convinced of disease progression. October 19. Patient refused morning smoothie. Had to administer evening dose at double concentration to maintain symptom consistency. November 2. Minor setback. New housekeeper showing excessive interest in patient. Will monitor. May need to recommend termination if interference continues. Teresa's vision blurred. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the notebook. This wasn't just poisoning. This was systematic, documented, calculated. Dr. Morse had been treating Oliver's murder like a science experiment, recording dosages, tracking symptoms, adjusting her methods to keep him sick but not dead. Not yet. Teresa photographed every page with trembling fingers. Then she saw something else, a folder tucked in the back of the cabinet. Legal documents. She pulled them out and her blood ran cold. James Walker's will, updated 18 months ago. And there, in black ink, in the event of Oliver Walker's death, Dr. Helena Morse shall receive $2 million in recognition of her tireless dedication and attempt to preserve his life. $2 million. For trying, for failing, for watching a child die despite her best efforts. The motive wasn't just greed, it was a retirement plan. A lottery ticket Oliver's death would cash in. Teresa heard footsteps in the hallway. Her heart stopped. She shoved everything back into the cabinet, relocked it, and slipped out the side door just as Mrs. Calloway appeared at the main entrance. "Teresa, what are you doing up here?" "Just finished Oliver's room," Teresa said, forcing her voice steady. "Was about to head downstairs." Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. "Dr. Morse will be back soon. Best not to be in her way." Teresa nodded and walked past her, every step measured, her phone burning in her pocket with the evidence that could save Oliver's life, or end hers. She made it to her room and locked the door. Then she sat on her bed and let herself shake, let herself cry, let the weight of what she'd found crash over her like a wave. Dr. Helena Morse wasn't just poisoning Oliver. She was documenting it, perfecting it, waiting for the exact right moment to let him die so she could collect her payment and walk away clean. And James Walker, exhausted, desperate, drowning in grief, had signed the papers that made his son's murder profitable. Teresa pulled out her phone and called Marcus. "I've got it," she whispered when he answered. "I've got everything. Photos of her journal, dosage records, the will. Marcus, she's been documenting the whole thing like a research project." "Jesus Christ." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Teresa, you need to go to the police. Right now." "Not yet." "What do you mean, not yet?" James won't believe the police if they just show up. He'll think I'm lying, that I'm trying to hurt his son. Doctor, Morse has spent 3 years building trust. I need to break that first. I need him to see it. Reese, I know what I'm doing, but she didn't. Not really. All she knew was that tonight she was going to knock on James Walker's door, and she was going to make him listen, make him see what his grief had blinded him to, make him understand that the woman he trusted was the one killing his son. And if he didn't believe her, if he chose Dr. Morse over the truth, then she'd go to the police anyway. She'd burn every bridge. She'd lose everything. But at least she'd know she tried. At least this time. She wouldn't be silent. She looked at the photo on her phone, Oliver's journal entry. Day 317. "I asked God why he made me sick. Maybe the plan is for me to die like Mama." No, Teresa thought fiercely. That's not the plan. The plan was for someone to see, for someone to fight, for someone to love him enough to risk everything. And maybe, just maybe, that's why she'd walked through those gates 3 weeks ago. Not for a paycheck, for this moment, for this choice, for this little boy who still believed in superheroes and didn't know he was about to be saved by a woman who just refused to look away. She wiped her tears and stood. It was almost midnight. Time to knock on the door that would change everything. Time to tell a grieving father the truth that would shatter him. And time to pray that love was stronger than fear. That truth was louder than lies. And that somewhere in the darkness, God was watching over a little boy who deserved to run through fields and dream with his eyes open. Teresa took a deep breath and went to save a life. The hallway felt longer at midnight. Teresa stood outside James Walker's office, her hand raised to knock, frozen in the space between courage and terror. Behind that door was a man who'd spent 3 years trying to save his son, a man who'd poured millions into specialists and treatments, a man who'd built his entire hope on the one person who'd stayed when everyone else left. And Teresa was about to tell him that person was a murderer. Her hand trembled as she knocked. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. James stood there in a wrinkled shirt, tie long gone, eyes bloodshot and hollow. He looked at her like he was trying to remember who she was. "Teresa, it's past midnight." "What?" "I need to talk to you about Oliver." Something flickered across his face. Irritation, maybe, or fear. "If this is about the medications again." "Please," her voice cracked. "I know you think I'm overstepping. I know you think I'm just the help. But I'm begging you, just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. The office was a mess. Papers everywhere, empty coffee cups. A photo of his wife on the desk, blonde hair, bright smile, holding a positive pregnancy test like it was the best news in the world. "What is it?" James asked, his voice tired, defeated. Teresa pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "Mr. Walker, I need you to look at something, and I need you to actually see it. Not as a father who's desperate, but as a man who loves his son." She showed him the first photo, Oliver's notebook, his small, heartbreaking handwriting. Day 247. The purple drink made me throw up again. James's face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "His bookshelf." He was documenting what was happening to him. He knew something was wrong, Mr. Walker, even when no one else did. She swiped to the next photo. Dr. Morse's journal. October 12. Increased oleander extract to 0.3 milligrams. Patient, showing appropriate symptoms. James took the phone from her hands, his fingers trembling. He read the entry once, twice, like he couldn't make the words make sense. "What is this?" It's Dr. Morse's dosage log. She's been poisoning Oliver for 3 years. Oleander extract. Small doses over time. It mimics degenerative illness perfectly. I had the residue from her blender tested. It's all there. James's breathing changed. Shallow. Quick. No. He shook his head. No, this doesn't. Doctor. Morse has been trying to save him. She's dedicated her life to keeping him sick, Teresa interrupted, her voice breaking. So she could collect $2 million when he died. She showed him the will, the clause, the payment for failure. James stared at it like it was written in a language he didn't speak. I wrote that will 18 months ago, he whispered. I thought it would motivate her. I thought if she knew she'd be taken care of, she'd try harder. She'd stay. She stayed because you made his death profitable. The words hung in the air like smoke. James sank into his chair, the phone slipping from his hands. His face crumbled, not with anger, with something worse. Grief. And recognition. I did this, he whispered. I made him a target. I signed the papers that turned my son into. He couldn't finish. His shoulders shook. Teresa knelt in front of him, her own tears falling freely now. You didn't know. You were trying to help him. You were desperate. I should have seen it. His voice was raw. Broken. I'm his father. I should have seen it. Mr. Walker. She was always there, every episode, every crisis, taking notes, adjusting treatments. And I thought she was trying to save him. He looked at Teresa with eyes full of horror. I've been paying someone to kill my son. The words seemed to shatter something in him. He put his head in his hands and sobbed deep, wrenching sounds that came from a place too broken for words. Teresa stayed there on her knees, her hand on his shoulder, letting him break. Because some truths don't just change your mind, they destroy your heart. After a long time, James lifted his head. His eyes were red but clear now, focused. Where is he? Where's Oliver? Sleeping. In his room. James stood, his movements sudden, desperate. We're taking him to the hospital, right now. We're not telling Dr. Morse. We're not telling anyone. Mr. Walker. If she knows we're onto her, she could, his voice broke again. She could finish it. She could take him from me, before we can stop her. He was already moving toward the door. Teresa followed, her heart pounding. They climbed the stairs together in silence. James pushed open Oliver's door so carefully, like he was afraid the boy might disappear if he moved too fast. Oliver was asleep, small and pale in that enormous bed, his breathing shallow, but steady. James moved to his side, his hand hovering over his son's face, like he was afraid to touch him, like he didn't deserve to. Hey, buddy, he whispered, his voice breaking. Wake up for me. Oliver's eyes fluttered open, confused, groggy. Dad, we're going on a trip, okay? Right now. It's night time. I know, but we need to go. Can you do that for me? Oliver nodded slowly, too tired to question. James lifted him carefully, his son barely weighed anything, and held him close. Oliver's head rested against his father's shoulder. Mr. Buttons clutched in his small hand. Miss Teresa? Oliver's voice was so quiet. Are you coming too? Teresa's throat closed. Yeah, baby, I'm coming. They moved through the dark house like thieves, past Mrs. Calloway's room, past the medical suite, where Dr. Morse's poison sat in locked cabinets. James's car was in the garage. He settled Oliver in the back seat, buckling him in with shaking hands. Teresa climbed in beside Oliver, and James got behind the wheel. As they pulled out of the garage, Oliver stirred. Dad? Where are we going? James looked at his son in the rearview mirror, tears streaming down his face. To save your life, buddy, he whispered. We're going to save your life. And as they drove through the dark Connecticut night, leaving behind the house that had become a tomb, Teresa closed her eyes and said a prayer. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the courage to speak. Thank you for making him listen. Thank you for this moment, this chance, because sometimes salvation comes at midnight. Sometimes it comes from a woman who refused to stay silent. And sometimes, just sometimes, the truth breaks through just in time. The emergency room lights were harsh and unforgiving, the kind that strip away pretense and show you exactly what's real. James carried Oliver through the sliding doors at 3 in the morning, Teresa right behind him. The nurse at the desk looked up, started to say something routine, then saw James's face and stopped. I need a doctor, James said, his voice raw. "My son has been poisoned. Oleander. 3 years. Please." The nurse was already moving, calling codes, bringing people. Within minutes, Oliver was on a gurney, being wheeled into a trauma bay, his small hand reaching back for his father. "Dad, I'm scared." "I know, buddy, I know. But these people are going to help you. Really help you this time." A doctor appeared, young, sharp-eyed, moving with purpose. "I'm Dr. Chen. Tell me everything." Teresa pulled out her phone with trembling hands, showed him the photos, Dr. Morse's journal, the dosage logs, Marcus's analysis. Dr. Chen's expression shifted from professional to horrified in seconds. "How long has this been happening?" 3 years, James whispered. "Jesus." Dr. Chen turned to the nurses. "Full toxicology panel, cardiac workup, get me digoxin levels and a poison control consult. Now." They moved around Oliver like a choreographed dance. IVs, monitors, blood draws. Oliver looked so small, surrounded by all those people, so fragile. "Am I dying?" he asked quietly. Dr. Chen knelt beside him, his voice gentle. "No, son, you're not dying. You're going to be okay. We're going to make sure of it." The words James had been desperate to hear from a doctor for 3 years, and now they came in the worst possible way. Because Oliver had never been dying of a disease. He'd been dying of trust. The waiting room was empty at that hour. Just James and Teresa sitting in plastic chairs under fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. James hadn't said a word since they'd taken Oliver back for tests. He just sat there, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "Mr. Walker," Teresa said softly. "I gave her a key to my house," he whispered. "I let her into his room every single day. I watched her make those smoothies and I thanked her for her dedication." His voice cracked. "I was paying her to kill my son, and I thanked her." "You didn't know." "I should have." He looked at her, his eyes devastated. "You knew. In 3 weeks, you saw what I couldn't see in 3 years. What does that make me?" "Human," Teresa said quietly. "It makes you human. You were drowning. You were desperate. You trusted the wrong person because she was the only one who stayed. My wife died bringing him into this world." James's voice broke completely. "And I almost let him follow her because I was too blind to see the truth." Teresa reached over and took his hand. He gripped it like a lifeline. "But you listened," she said. "When it mattered most, you listened. You got him out. You brought him here. That counts." "Does it?" Before she could answer, Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway. His face was grim. "Mr. Walker, we have the preliminary results." They stood, James's hand still gripping Teresa's. "Your son has dangerously elevated levels of cardiac glycosides. The pattern is consistent with chronic oleander poisoning. Based on what we're seeing, this has been systematic and prolonged." He paused. "If you'd waited another month, maybe less, his heart would have given out. The damage is extensive but not irreversible. He's going to need careful monitoring, chelation, therapy, time to heal, but he's going to live." James's knees buckled. Teresa caught him. "He's going to live," Dr. Chen repeated gently. "You got him here in time." James pressed his fist against his mouth, trying to hold back the sound that wanted to break free. Relief and horror tangled so tight they were the same thing. "I've already contacted the police," Dr. Chen continued. "This is a criminal matter. They'll need your statement and the evidence you brought." James nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Chen's expression softened. "He's asking for you, both of you." They followed him back to the bay where Oliver lay, surrounded by machines, looking impossibly small but somehow already better. Color was returning to his cheeks. His breathing was easier. "Dad." Oliver's voice was hoarse but clear. "The doctor said, I'm not really sick. He said someone was hurting me on purpose." James moved to his son's side, taking his hand carefully. "Yeah, buddy, someone was, but they can't hurt you anymore. I promise." "Was it Dr. Morse?" The question hung in the sterile air. James closed his eyes. "Yeah, it was." Oliver was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, why would she do that? How do you explain evil to a child who still believes in superheroes? "Because sometimes people get lost," James said finally. "Sometimes they forget what matters, and they make choices that hurt people who never deserved it." Oliver looked at Teresa. "You saved me, didn't you?" Teresa's eyes filled with tears. "You saved yourself, baby. You wrote it all down. You knew something was wrong. You just needed someone to listen. My sister didn't have anyone to listen, Teresa said softly. So I promised I'd always listen, even when it was hard. Oliver reached out his small hand. Teresa took it. Thank you for listening, he whispered. And in that moment, in that hospital bay under fluorescent lights at 4 a.m, something broken began to heal. Not Oliver's body. That would take time. But something deeper. Something that had been dying in all of them. Hope. The belief that truth could win. That speaking up mattered. That one person refusing to look away could change everything. James watched his son, really watched him, and saw something he hadn't seen in 3 years. A future. And for the first time since his wife died, he let himself believe it was possible. That his son would grow up. That he'd run through fields and dream with his eyes open. That he'd live. Because sometimes grace arrives at 3 a.m. in an emergency room. Sometimes it comes through a woman who refused to be silent. And sometimes, just sometimes, God catches the ones who are falling just before they hit the ground. By the time the sun rose over Long Island Sound, 2 police officers were standing in James Walker's driveway. Dr. Helena Morse was packing her office. She'd noticed the disconnected medical equipment in Oliver's room at dawn, the empty bed, the silence where machines used to beep. And she knew. Mrs. Calloway found her loading boxes into her Mercedes, moving with the kind of calm efficiency that comes from planning an exit strategy long before you need it. Dr. Morse? What's happening? Helena didn't look up. The boy took a turn. They've taken him to the hospital. I'm gathering my research to consult with the team there. But her hands were shaking, just slightly. That's when the police cars pulled through the gates. Helena stopped moving. Her face went very still. The officers approached, badges out. Dr. Helena Morse. Yes? We need you to come with us. There are some questions regarding your treatment of Oliver Walker. I don't understand. I've done everything possible for that child. Ma'am, we have evidence of systematic poisoning. Oleander extract administered over a 3-year period. We have documentation in your own handwriting. For just a moment, one brief, unguarded moment, the mask slipped. Not shock, not confusion. Rage. Cold, calculated rage. That maid, she said quietly. That ignorant, meddling. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. But Helena was done being silent. 3 years of performance, of playing the dedicated professional, of swallowing her resentment while James Walker threw money at specialists who wouldn't know real science if it killed them. All of it came pouring out. Do you know how many degrees I have? How brilliant I am? Her voice rose. I spent 3 years playing nursemaid to a spoiled brat while his father paid millions to incompetent doctors. 3 years of watching him grieve a woman who died, bringing that child into the world. I earned that inheritance. I earned every penny. Mrs. Calloway stepped back, her hand over her mouth. He was supposed to die slowly, peacefully, like a disease no one could cure. Helena's eyes were ice. And I would have been the devoted caregiver who tried everything, who stayed when everyone else left, who deserved to be remembered in his will. But that maid, that nobody, she ruined everything. The officers were already moving, handcuffs out. Dr. Morse, you're under arrest for attempted murder, child endangerment, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As they read her rights, Helena's eyes found Mrs. Calloway. You all treated me like help, like my intelligence was something to be tolerated, but I was the smartest person in that house. I was the only one who saw that boy for what he was, a meal ticket, a retirement plan. Mrs. Calloway was crying now. He's 8 years old. He was a means to an end. No remorse, no shame, just cold calculation, and he would have died peacefully if that woman had minded her own business. They put her in the car, drove her away, and the Walker estate, that beautiful, suffocating house, finally knew the truth it had been hiding for 3 years. At the hospital, James stood outside Oliver's room, phone pressed to his ear, talking to lawyers and police, giving statements, answering questions, but his eyes never left his son through the window. Oliver was sitting up now, color in his cheeks, eating real food for the first time in weeks without getting sick. Dr. Chen had started the chelation therapy slowly, pulling the poison from his system. It would take time, weeks, maybe months. But every hour, Oliver looked more alive, more like the boy he was supposed to be. Teresa sat beside him, reading, the same dragon book from his room. Oliver listened, his eyes bright and clear in a way they hadn't been since he was 5 years old. When the chapter ended, Oliver looked at her. "Miss Teresa, did they catch her?" Teresa had been dreading this question. How do you tell a child that the woman who smiled at him every day, who made his smoothies and called him sweetheart, had been trying to kill him? "Yeah, baby. They caught her." "Is she going to jail?" "Yes." Oliver was quiet for a long time. Then, "Good." Not angry, not vindictive, just relieved. "She used to tell me I was lucky," Oliver said softly, "that I had the best doctors and the best care and I should be grateful, but I never felt lucky. I just felt like I was drowning and nobody could see it." Teresa's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's not your fault." He looked at her with eyes too wise for 8 years old. "You're the one who pulled me out." James entered then, his face drawn but determined. He sat on the other side of Oliver's bed. "Hey, buddy, how you feeling?" "Better. Dr. Chen says I can try walking tomorrow." "Yeah." James's voice cracked. "That's great." Oliver reached for his father's hand. "Dad, are you mad at me?" James looked stricken. "What? No. Oliver, why would I be mad at you? Because Mum died having me. And then I got sick and cost you all that money. And now this whole thing with Dr. Morse." He trailed off, tears welling up. James gathered his son carefully into his arms, holding him like he was afraid he might break, but also like he never wanted to let go. "Listen to me," James whispered. "None of this, none of it is your fault. Your mum loved you before she even met you. She chose you, and I would spend every penny I have, every day for the rest of my life, if it meant keeping you safe. You understand me?" Oliver nodded against his father's chest. "I'm the one who should be asking for forgiveness," James continued, his voice breaking. "I brought her into our house. I trusted her. I let her hurt you because I was too broken to see what was right in front of me. You didn't know, Dad. But I should have. You're my son. I should have known." They held each other, both of them crying now, releasing 3 years of fear and pain and guilt that had been trapped inside. Teresa stood quietly, starting to leave to give them privacy. "Teresa, wait," James said. "Don't go." She turned. "You saved his life. You saw what I couldn't see. You risked everything when you didn't have to." His eyes were red but clear. "I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't have to thank me," Teresa said softly. "I just did what anyone should do. I saw a child who needed help, and I helped." "But not everyone would have," James said. "Most people would have stayed quiet, stayed safe. You didn't." Oliver reached out his hand to her. "Will you stay, even now that I'm getting better?" Teresa took his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Yeah, baby, I'll stay. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it comes in hospital rooms and quiet promises. Sometimes it comes through children who forgive too easily, and fathers who learn to see. And sometimes it comes through a woman who refused to let silence win. Not this time. Not when a life was on the line. Not when love required her to be brave." 6 weeks later, the Walker estate learned how to breathe again. The medical equipment was gone. The locked cabinets emptied. The curtains in Oliver's room stayed open now, letting October sunlight spill across floors that had been dark for too long. And for the first time in 3 years, there was laughter. Real laughter. The kind that echoes off walls and reminds a house what it was built for. Oliver was running. Not far, not fast, not yet, but running. Through the gardens his father had forgotten existed. Past the flower beds that were finally being tended again. His legs were still weak, still learning how to carry him. But every day, he got a little stronger, a little more like the boy he was always meant to be. Teresa watched from the porch, her hand shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. She wasn't wearing her uniform anymore. James had asked her to stay, not as a housekeeper, but as Oliver's caregiver. He'd set up a scholarship in her name, covering her nursing school tuition, giving her the future her sister never got. "You gave my son his life back," James had said. "Let me help you build yours." She'd cried when he said it. Cried for Janelle, cried for Oliver, cried for every moment she'd been too afraid to speak, and all the moments she'd found the courage anyway. Oliver stumbled, caught himself, and kept going. Mr. Buttons was tucked under his arm. He still carried that bear everywhere. Some things don't need to change. James appeared beside Teresa, 2 glasses of lemonade in his hands. He'd taken a leave from work, decided some things mattered more than board meetings and quarterly reports. Like watching your son remember how to be a child. He asked me this morning if we could get a dog, James said, a smile tugging at his lips. What'd you say? I said yes. He laughed softly. 3 years I spent trying to keep him alive, and now he wants a puppy. Life's funny that way. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching Oliver chase butterflies that danced just out of reach. You know what the hardest part is? James said quietly. Forgiving myself, for not seeing it, for trusting her, for almost losing him because I was too desperate to think clearly. Teresa looked at him. You were a father trying to save his son. There's no shame in that. But you saw it. In 3 weeks, you saw what I missed in 3 years. I saw it because I'd lived it, Teresa said. Because I'd already lost someone. Because I knew what it cost to stay quiet. She paused. You didn't have that. You were just trying to hold on. James's eyes were wet. She told me once that she'd been sent by God, Dr. Morse. She said it was divine appointment that she came into our lives when Oliver got sick. He shook his head. I believed her. Maybe she was right, Teresa said softly. Just not the way she thought. James looked at her, confused. Maybe God did send someone, just not her. Teresa smiled. Maybe he sent the maid who'd learned to speak up, who'd promised her sister she'd never stay silent again, who showed up 3 weeks before. It would have been too late. The words settled between them like grace. Oliver ran up to them, breathless and beaming, cheeks flushed with life. Did you see me? I ran all the way to the fountain. James knelt down, pulling his son close. I saw, buddy. You were amazing. Oliver looked at Teresa. Will you come run with me tomorrow? Every day if you want. Promise? Promise. Oliver hugged her tight, his small arms fierce with love. Then he pulled back, his face suddenly serious. Miss Teresa, I think you're my hero. Teresa's breath caught. Baby, I'm not a hero. Yes, you are, Oliver insisted. Heroes are the people who save you when no one else can. And that's what you did. She pulled him close, tears falling freely now. Then you're my hero too, because you taught me that speaking up matters, that one voice can change everything. James wrapped his arms around both of them, the 3 of them holding each other as the sun painted the sky in gold and amber. 3 broken people who'd found their way to hope, a father who'd learned to see, a son who'd learned to live, and a woman who'd learned that her sister's death hadn't been meaningless. It had given her the courage to save another life when it counted most. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the water, Teresa stood in Oliver's doorway watching him sleep. Really sleep. Not drugged, not poisoned, just a child, dreaming the way children should. She thought about Janelle, about the promise she'd made in the rain at her sister's funeral. I'll never stay silent again. I promise, Nella, never again. She'd kept that promise, and it had cost her everything. She'd been afraid to lose her safety, her job security, her invisibility, but it had given her something infinitely more valuable. Purpose, redemption, a second chance to get it right. Thank you, she whispered to the sister she'd never stopped missing. Thank you for teaching me what silence costs, for giving me the courage to be brave. And somewhere in the space between grief and grace, she felt it a peace she hadn't known in 5 years. Because some losses teach us how to save. Some promises are kept in hospital rooms and midnight confessions. And sometimes, God's plan doesn't look like we expect. Sometimes it looks like a maid with a promise, a father willing to listen, and a little boy who just needed someone to see him, really see him, and refuse to look away. Oliver stirred in his sleep, a smile on his lips, dreaming of running and dogs and tomorrows he'd almost never had, and Teresa smiled through her tears, knowing that every hard thing she'd lived through had led her here. To this moment, to this child, to this family that wasn't hers by blood, but had become hers by choice. Because that's what love does. It shows up when it's hard. It speaks when silence is easier. It fights for the ones who can't fight for themselves. And it changes everything. One voice, one choice, one moment of courage. That's all it takes to save a life. And sometimes, just sometimes, to save your own. If this story touched something in your heart, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? What moment moved you most? And if you believe that one person speaking up can change everything, hit that subscribe button. Because these stories, they're reminders that courage lives in ordinary people, that grace still finds us, and that sometimes the person God sends isn't the one we're expecting. Sometimes it's the one who refuses to stay silent. Share this with someone who needs to remember they're not alone. And know this, your voice matters, your courage matters, you matter. See you in the next story.